this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I came up with this idea of rather than doing like species or genus type updates, which is quite complicated because the plants are all over the place, just pick on a shelf and whatever's on it, film that. So gradually, obviously all the plants will get filmed, like a mid-season sort of update. But it'll have to be done over a while. But I'm taking advantage of the hot weather because the watering comes round a lot more frequently. So I'll do some plants today, but I've got to water all of them. Yeah, but I can't film all of them as well, or I'll be here all day, literally. I've got other things to do. So I thought I'd give it a start, and do a couple of shelves and film as I go, and then just crack on with the watering. And then next time when I'm watering all my pots, I can start filming at a different point, or start watering at a different point. Today's quite an easy water because it's a nearly flush. And what do I mean by nearly flush? I had some water left over yesterday that had quite a high level feed in it because I was doing the mounts at the time. So what I did was I put a load of clean water in that and then just checked the TDS, and it came out at 35, so it's almost a flush. And I added a little bit of CalMag in there to take advantage of the fact that they're not getting properly fed this time round. So it's an almost flush. It's not pure water, but it's pure enough to just flush out anything that's in there. And carrying on with my theory of having lots of water available but only a small amount in my bowl, so I only get to water 4 or 5 pots, and then I have to go and get some more water. So I'm constantly replenishing that water rather than using it over and over again. And that seems to stop any build-up of TDS, stops the pH dropping and all that sort of stuff, and it gives them a better flush than they used to get when I had large volumes of water and kept reusing it. So that seems to be working. So I'll get going, otherwise the fans and everything will be on and I'll run out of time. Right, I'm starting on this shelf today. I'm doing things in a different order. So this is a bit of an assortment, but although that looks like a lot, there's not actually that many plants there because several of them are quite large plants. Right, this little recovering Alasiri is currently in bloom. Not a brilliant spike, but brilliant blooms. This one's sort of taken a long time to recover, and the latest growth on it, this one back here, as an Oncidium intergeneric type, these have very small leaves. They don't grow huge long leaves like some of them do. If you think of the size of the leaves on Sharry babies and things like that, these tend to be more like almost half the height is pseudobulb. So they're quite compact, or this one certainly is. It's Alasiri Evening Colours, the gloaming. So it's a nice compact plant. And recovering. I won't say it's fully recovered yet. Another new growth coming up there. Doesn't look as strong as the one that's got the bloom spike on, but nonetheless it's got new growths, which it hasn't had for a very long time, and underneath those new growths are some roots. So it's coming on. It's a very slow progress on this one though. Well, these are the Dendrobium Herkogloss kikis that I potted up a while ago, and that tiny little new growth that I was being really careful of is pushed on quite nicely. Basically kikis, they will take a while before they push out their new growths from the base, but at least one of them's already doing it, the other two not yet. But they all had reasonable roots on, so once those roots adapt to being in media instead of well, I always transition with kikis. I take them off the plant, I water them. As I water the plant, I water the kikis to make sure the roots are getting some water. And then when they're ready to take off, at least they've been watered. And then I stand them in a glass with the root tips in water for a couple of weeks, just to get them used to being more wet, and then they get potted up. But always worth remembering with kikis, it should look like a plant before you take it off. So it should have open leaves and a little root system. So it looks like a little plant. If it hasn't got a root system, it's just going to stall. And if you take it off before the leaves open, again, it'll stall. Yeah? If the leaves are open, it can photosynthesize. And if it's got a little root system, it can get going in some media. So make sure it looks like a little plant. Now, the Miltonius Sunset, we're always catching the blooms in the videos, but very rarely stop and take a look at the plant. Certainly as Miltonias go, although this is a hybrid, it's vigorous. A lot of Miltonias are not that vigorous, but this one chucks out new growths all over the place, and it's bordering now outgrowing its pot. It's so far bloomed on every single new growth it's had since I had the plant. That's a lot of blooms, and I've just noticed this little new growth at the front here has another spike coming, so another one coming on behind. Pushes up new growths all through the year. They come and go, and therefore they mature at different times of the year. So this one can be in bloom almost anywhen. And just looking at this, this is pushing the luck with the light levels, and it's probably being affected by the heat as well. But these leaves are very pale. Yeah, they're just on their limit, I would suggest. If it gets much brighter in here, they may start to suffer. But they're a reasonable green. I'd like to see them a fraction darker than that. There's not much I can do about it. I can't start shading individual plants. And some of my plants are restricted to where they can go because of their size. This can't go on a lower shelf, it's too tall. And add the bloom spikes on the top as well, it's far too tall, so it can only go on a top shelf. So it's limited to where it can go. Under normal circumstances, I don't get this level of light intensity, and even if I do, it's very rarely combined with this level of heat. Nonetheless, it's doing okay. I wouldn't say this is suffering in the heat, but it's drying out incredibly quickly, so I do have to keep up with it. Well, this is a Miltonidium Peter Comp. If you come across this one and the blooms are appealing to you, then get it. It's very fragrant, and it's a lovely, sweet, pleasant fragrance. None of this, oh, I'm not so sure. I can't imagine anybody who gets near this is going to think anything other than that's nice. As far as the plant's concerned, it's actually two. When I repotted it, some of the old bulbs needed taking off, and as a consequence the rhizome ended up splitting. So it's actually two individual plants in here, which will need repotting soon because it's right on the edge. The next new growth that follows on from here is going to be out of the pot. So at that point the two pieces, because over this side it's right on the edge of the pot as well. So next time round they will probably get potted up separately. The problem with putting two plants in the same pot is it ends up being a pot that's really too big for the two individual root systems, if you see what I mean. Pot should really accommodate roots and no more. Loads of spare ground around the roots, you know, it can just lead to the media staying wet too long. And that's the first time I think a growth on this has ever done that. It's pushed up a spike on both sides. So we've got this one to come, that's quite advanced, and now another one, that's on the same bulb. Now, Oncidium types, which are Miltonias in the alliance, can do that. I mean, twinkles are renowned for blooming on both sides of every new growth, but this one hasn't done that before. And strangely enough, the other one round here, which is a bigger bulb, isn't doing it yet. It still might. Oh, I'm not sure. We'll wait and see. It either will or it won't. But as I say, if those blooms are appealing to you, it's a very, very fragrant orchid. Relatively vigorous, and the leaves on this are about in the right light. If you notice, they're a little darker green than the previous one we looked at, the Miltonius Sunset. So these leaves are happy in their light level. They're okay. But again, it's drying out incredibly quickly at the moment. Now, this is the little Rodriguezia liana that was on a mount, and it just basically had so many aerial roots that I couldn't keep it hydrated. You can see leaves started to suffer a bit, so I decided wholly clay pot and we'll see what it does. Well, at the moment it's probably sulking. I don't know it is, but it probably is, on the grounds that it had a load of aerial roots stuck in media. But nonetheless, I'm waiting for the next new growth on this. This did actually have two flower spikes on this little winter growth, which I was very surprised about. And the other thing I was surprised about is it stunk the whole place out. Just because a plant is described as fragrant doesn't mean to say you're going to like it, and I certainly didn't like that one. Rachel's bloomed not that long ago, because this was a division from Rachel, and she didn't like it either. So you're not in the good books as regards the fragrance is concerned, but the blooms were very attractive. Quite an unusual shape, but boy was that a stinky one, and unexpected. And again, this the blooms got filmed an awful lot. We had 4 spikes on that on this one this time. This is the on my label. It's a milt something or other. It's Miltonia Shelob Tolkien, but I think strictly speaking it's really a Bratonia. They've changed the way that hybridization name works, and quite honestly Bratonia makes much more sense. The problem is with Miltonia, the tassia bit is obviously reflecting its brassica nature, but what's the milt? Is it Miltonia or Miltoniopsis? It's confusing. Whereas if you change it to Bratonia, then the brat bit at the front is obviously the brassica, and the tonia bit is obviously Miltonia, so it makes far more sense. Sometimes renaming these things is actually sensible. Most of the time it gets on your flipping thrupneys. Now again, we've got older leaves on here, so I don't worry about colour on those. I worry about the colouring on the leaves that are on the new growths. And on this one, I'd say they were perfect. They're a nice, good green. There's no paling, so they're not getting too much light by any means, but they're not a deep green, so it's obviously getting more than enough light. Well, if it wasn't, it probably wouldn't chuck out 4 bloom spikes, would it? Again, this one blooms on every new growth, and it's a vigorous grower. And as far as the plant's gone, it's run out of new growths now, so all the new growths have now bloomed. And they bloom before the pseudobulbs are completely formed. So if you look, that's an older bulb, and you can see the pseudobulb swells up in the centre. And this one hasn't done it yet. And that's what they will look like, the ones that have bloomed. See, this one's starting to swell now, but this was the last one to bloom, and this spike's coming off now. Yeah, so this one's not fully swollen. And then shortly, these bulbs will all fully mature, and then each one of them will push out 1 or more new growths. The or more bit's got a question mark on the end, and probably wishful thinking. But in the main, that's going to push out a new growth where all of the previous growths were. And quite honestly, I think that can stay in its pot. It wasn't repotted too long ago, and it hasn't completely reached the edge of the pot yet. So I think I'll let that live another round in its in the same pot and get another 3 or 4 new growths going, let them bloom, and then think about it'll have to be divided when it gets repotted, because I haven't got pots wide enough. The trouble is with having a big pot with width, 9 times out of 10 you get depth, and then you've got half a pot full of media that's probably never going to have any roots in it, and it'll get soggy and then it'll break down. So it's not ideal. So there comes a time when a plant just outgrows its accommodation. And quite honestly, there's quite a lot of plants when you split them. There's an element of rejuvenation going on. It gives you a chance to take some of the leafless batch bulbs off, providing you've got enough good leaved bulbs to still make a good plant. They suggest that a minimum of 3 leaved pseudobulbs when you're dividing. It's not always possible, but you know, 4 would be good. But this plant will probably, the fact that it's got the number of leads on it, it could be, I know it can be split into 4, but each one of those might not have enough bulbs on it. So I'll probably split it in 2 with 2 leads on both plants and sufficient back bulbs to make 2 nice plants out of it. But yeah, it's been in bloom a hell of a long time. It's done well, and it's just doing that lovely washed out colour as the blooms die off. All the spots look like they run into each other and then they die. But plant's doing well, good coloured leaves, so pleased with that. So that's just about in the right amount of light, just the job. Well, this is the what I'll call the live half of the massive Dendrobium Crytotoxin that I got earlier this year. This is the part of the plant that's going to bloom, and it will. Although it's bloomed on several of the canes. It hasn't bloomed on all of them, so there's some unbloomed canes there, so providing that gets the right treatment, that should bloom again in the spring. And the little new growths that I was taking extra care of when I was repotting it are pushing on at quite a rate of knots here. These two are, and this one's coming on now. And the good thing is, this had some roots, but it wasn't what I'd call an excellent root system, but it will be soon. The new growths are pushing out what will be almost a total replacement. But even some of the older roots are branching. Well, the fact that I can see some of them that are above ground, that's probably going on in the pot as well. So even though that wasn't a brilliant root system, it's probably extending on the existing roots, and then we've got a mass of replacement roots coming on. So yeah, that should pull on nicely now. And we'll have a look at the other half of it, what I call the not alive bit. I won't use the word dead, but it doesn't have growth on it at the moment, so we'll have a look at that bit in a minute. That's tucked up the back of the shelf. Well, these are my two Manky Psychopsis, and these are borderline nearly had enough of. This one objected strongly to being in the house in the winter, trying to keep the warmth there and not letting it get too cold, but it did not like the dry atmosphere at all. When it was last repotted, it had 0 roots. Well, since then it's grown some. So there are some roots in there. Not many, but there are some. But it's, you know, the leaves it's got are never going to look good. You know, I mean, that was the leaf on its last growth. It's terrible. Just will not get going. The spike, the last bloom was distorted, and I'm not sure that spike's going to continue. There is some sign of green at the top. We'll have to wait and see. This one, again, objected to being in the house. Just didn't like the dry atmosphere. Very, very weak last growth. And the spike completely died back. So I cut it to see if it would branch, which it hasn't done. But this one at least is growing a new growth. And this one has got a root system. This did grow some roots through the winter. But yeah, neither of these two are doing any good, and quite honestly, if I see any more Psychopsis with spikes on that look quite good, I will probably get replacement plants for these two. I've had these two ages and ages, and they did the classic suffer, where it's rumoured they do not like root disturbance. So you sort of keep putting it off until your media breaks down and takes out your root system. Well, that works well, doesn't it? Yeah, but I got caught. Yeah, so both of those ended up in that situation. And I don't know whether they're ever going to be any good. You know, it's I don't like looking at them. The leaves are awful. They don't grow quickly. And they both look like they may have lost their spikes, so they serve no purpose anymore. It's something I would never like to be without. I would always like a Psychopsis, but I think it's a matter of trying to find another good one. And they don't come up very often. You know, around the shows and things, the vendors have very rarely got any. Anyway, I'll keep my eye out. If I can get a good one that's got new growths and at least one existing spike and a root system, I'll grab it. Because like I've said, with the YouTube money coming in now, the cost of an orchid to me is now far less relevant. If it's one I want, I will get it, because I'm not really paying for it out of my own pocket, if you see what I mean. So I'm far more inclined to look for a good plant now and just pay whatever's wanted for it, because I don't buy that many anyway. So anyway, but that's the two Manky Psychopsis, not doing at all well. And this is the not so good half of the Dendrobium Crytotoxin. I mean, effectively this was the oldest part of the plant. Most of the canes have lost their leaves. This one will lose these two leaves in the not too distant future. Very few decent roots under this part of the plant, and no sign of any new growths. But I thought, well, what's the harm in chucking it in a pot? It might grow. If it doesn't, I'm not particularly worried, on the grounds the other half of the plant's doing really well. So this is just more like a backup. If it grows and gets some new growths on it, it will never look as good as the other one, because its starting point is leafless canes. If you see what I mean, you know, if that put up 3 nice new growths, the plant's still not going to look very good, because at the moment it's got 5 poor canes. So, you know, it's never going to look that good, I don't think. But I'll keep it for a while and see if I can get it to grow. It might be of interest perhaps to somebody else to grow on over the years. We'll see. This is my Odontoglossum species, Avian, and this bloomed on all of its new growths, so it's finished now. There are no more new growths unbloomed. It's done that now, and it's having a little bit of a rest. That's the polite version. I think it's having a sulk. It just doesn't like this heat. I've got it on the floor, I've got it as low as I can get it, but I don't think really this is going to start producing new growth for a while now. It's probably just going to have a little bit of a sulk for a while. Would have used a lot of energy producing all those spikes, and those new growths at the time, I did say, are not as large as the previous ones, but they've carried on growing even after it finished blooming, so they've carried on sort of plumping up, so they don't look as bad now. But there's no signs of any brand new growths on here at the moment, and the chances are they're going to come later in the year, then grow on through the winter into the spring to bloom again next year, probably. But plant's looking okay, leaf colour's good, yeah. So it's doing okay, but as I say, there's no real activity going on at the moment. Hasn't been in its pot too long, so it can stay where it is, undisturbed, and just it'll kick into life again down the line a bit. This is my solojourney cristata. This is growing well this year. This will be its best year's growth that I've ever had, and the beauty of the growth this year is it's not draining the old bulbs. The old bulbs are staying nice and plump and keeping their leaves, come to think of it. Well, so far. They will drop them eventually. But yeah, I've got a good number of strong new growths pushing up here. Excellent sort of growth. This was one of 2. The other one was in the giveaway drawer, so that's gone off to somebody else to take care of now. But I'm well pleased with the new growths on here. The bulbs haven't started to swell on these new growths yet, but the leaves haven't fully opened yet. They're still progressing in height at the moment, and then eventually the 2 leaves will split and separate and head off in opposite directions like they do. But it's quite a long way off doing that yet, I think. But these things, oh, I got a spider on that one. You can stay, you eat things. Where'd he go? It's only a little one. Don't panic. Oh, there he is down. Oh, he's got his own little web as well. Jolly good. Oh, you can stay. Yes, but this plant has come on. I had this plant for quite a long time, and it did very little, and it shriveled. Quite a lot of those parts got taken off. This is in fact several pieces crammed into one pot basically. And these will grow on top of each other. Pseudo bulbs will grow upwards on top of older bulbs, and the older bulbs don't sort of die and rot, they stay there, and you can end up with quite a lump of, like a solid lump of bulbs all pushing out growths and things in all directions. That just seems to be how it likes to grow. But yeah, it's coming on well. I'm pleased with that. That lives on the floor as well where it's cooler. That's why we never see it. Yeah, you just keep eating things, that'd be good. That's that one anyway. This is my Phalaenopsis sweet memory, and we keep looking at the blooms, yeah, and forget to look at the plant. The plant's not actually doing that well. Latest leaf is very pale and limp, and this one's not sturdy and leathery either. I think I might have to step up the watering. This never has had a very good root system, but in under here there are root tips growing. So I've got a feeling it's just a little lacking hydration. Its oldest leaf is yellowing now, so that'll be gone soon. I think it just needs watering a bit more often. It's in the largest bark, but obviously it dries incredibly quickly, and it hasn't got a massive root system to hydrate the plant. So I think it's going to be down to me to just water it a bit more often, which is it's a bit sloppy on my part. It's right under my nose. You know, it's one that is what lives right there on that bit of that shelf. You can't help but look at it. So I need to pick up on that one, I think. This is my Oncidium Twinkle, the yellow one, This had a bit of a rest after its mass blooming, because that actually got a first at a show I took it to. Plant doesn't look like it now, but the older bulbs are not that brilliant. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 new growths coming, so there'll be at least 4 spikes on it once they mature. But again, the older part of the plant's getting to look a little bit tired now. So that might need rejuvenating and some of the older parts taking off, leaving the better parts. You can see the best part of the plant is this bit, around this side. 3 new growths and still got some bright leaves, whereas sort of around this side it doesn't look so good, and there's only 1 new growth and leafless bulbs. So yeah, that might need looking into down the line. But again, that got repotted after its blooming in the back when it was early spring, I think. So it can stay in its pot for a bit undisturbed and just let it get on with itself for a bit. And this bulbophyllum's coming on. This is Delatescens. These blooms are not open as such. I don't know how much more they will open, but we'll have to wait and see. Another spike coming up here, and both of those spikes are on the oldest part of the plant. The new part of the plant's up against the side of the pot. Anyway, it's coming on. Doing okay, I suppose. And my other potted bulbophyllum is turning into a bit of a monster. I didn't realise it was going to get that big, but the newer leaves on this seem to be getting bigger than what I had before, which is good. It's progress, but it does mean it's turning into something big. Now this is growing in 2 directions, basically. Let's try not to knock that bloom spike flying behind me. It took off against the pot here and produced a growth out each side, and both of those are leaves, yeah, so pseudobulbs and leaves, getting a bit squashed against the edge of the pot there. No sign of any bloom spikes yet, and around the other side of the pot it's done exactly the same. It's pushed out new growths in either direction, and this is what they look like, yeah. So they're not going to be spikes, they are going to be bulbs, and they will turn into leaves. So that's effectively 4 or 5 new growths on this without a sign of a spike. So it's now got strength, it's now a large healthy plant. So it now needs to get on and bloom. Come on! I haven't seen this one yet, and I think these are the single large type bulbophyllum blooms, as opposed to the ones that have like the hand, you know, with the lots of little ones. I think this tends to have single large blooms. Whether they're stinky or not, we'll have to wait and see, but it would be nice to see some. But the plant's doing well. I certainly have no complaints about the plant growth. It's pushed on great guns. But yeah, it would be nice to see some blooms on it. Plural, as I've waited for so long. Coming on anyway. I've changed my mind about that sweet memory. As you know, when plants come into bloom, they get moved somewhere where the blooms can be displayed. You know, there's no good having blooms like right at the back corner on a low shelf. I think that's getting too much light. Where I brought it up onto this higher shelf because the blooms opened, I think that's getting too much light. So now I've got to try and find somewhere where it can get less light without never seeing the blooms again. And also it doesn't want to get too cool, so this is a nice lower light area here, but that's under the constant blast of these little computer fans to keep the air cool, whereas that doesn't really want to get cool. So I think I might have to try and find a place over here, perhaps on the end there. You know, it means I'm not going to be able to see the blooms so well because they are slightly tipping downwards, but for the sake of the plant, you know, I think it's just getting too much light where it is. That's the consequences of raising it up to see the blooms. I mean, it was actually up on this shelf. Quite honestly, I might be able to get it on the corner here. If there's enough plants above it to subdue the light, because there's very little above that, the light can come in quite strongly there. I might be able to get it on this corner, which would be a good place to still be able to see the blooms. Anyway, I finished filming for now for this one, so that's got that high shelf there done. A couple of plants on here, and the ones that live under that fog are on the floor, so that's those done. And yeah, next time perhaps I'll start over here or start down the bottom and work up. But I like this idea of, as I water, film everything as I go along. That way there's a bit of variety in the plant types, you know, rather than them all being the same. So I'll leave it at that for this one, and crack on with my watering before all these fans and everything start going, blowing me wig off. See you next time.